Hello and welcome to the Mere Mortals, and today we look at the top 10 execution methods. At number 10 we have the garrote. The garrote is a device that strangles a person to death. It normally consisted of a seat in which the prisoner was restrained, while the executioner slowly tightened a metal band around his neck. Some versions implemented a metal bolt which pressed into the spinal cord. The last execution of this kind was in October 1977. At number 9 we have burning. This method of execution was normally done in one of two ways. Number 1, the victim is tied to a stake, then the space between the wall and the victim would be filled with wood, concealing the person. The other method was to pile sticks and straw up to the level of the calves only. When performed by a skilled executioner, the person would burn in this sequence: calves, thighs and hands, torso and forearms, upper chest, and then finally their face. At number 8 we have boiling. When the execution of boiling is done, the condemned is stripped naked and either placed in a vat of boiling liquid or in a vat of cold liquid, which was then heated to boiling point. The liquid could be oil, tar, water, or molten lead. During the reign of King Henry VIII, it was a punishment especially reserved for prisoners. At number 7 we have something called Ling Chi. This execution by slow cutting was practiced in China until it was outlawed in 1905. The prisoner would be fastened to a rough cross and cut numerous times in the arms, legs and torso. Then, when the victim is pleading for death, they would be either beheaded or stabbed through the heart. At number 6 we have flaying or skinning. This is an ancient form of execution where the skin of the criminal is removed from their body while still alive with a very sharp knife. Attempts are made to keep the skin intact, creating a sort of skin suit. This is a very ancient method of execution. It is also the motto of House Bolton in Game of Thrones, stating that a flayed man holds no secrets. At number 5 we have sawing. Now this execution would see the condemned hung upside down and then slowly cut in half with a large saw, starting with the groin going down to the head. Because the person is hanging upside down, the brain would receive sufficient blood to keep the victim alive until the saw finally reached the main blood vessels in the abdomen. In the Asian version of this execution, the victim would stand upright and the saw would begin at his head. At number 4 we have the brazen bull, one you may have heard of. The brazen bull was invented by Perilius of Athens, brass worker, in the 16th century BC. It was offered to Tyrant Phalaris as a gift. It was a large brass bull that was completely hollow inside, with a door on the side large enough for a man to enter. Once the man was inside the bull, a fire would be lit beneath it in order to roast him to death in the head of the bull. In the crafting of the brazen bull, there would be a series of tubes and stops that were designed to amplify the screams of the victim inside, making them sound like the roaring of a bull. At number 3, we have the breaking wheel. This is a medieval device. The criminal would be attached to a cart wheel and his arms and legs stretched out along the spokes. The wheel would then be made to turn, while a heavy metal bar or hammer would deliver bone-breaking blows to various parts of the body between the spokes. This would go on for some time. If a merciful execution was called for, after several bones had been shattered, fatal blows would be delivered to the head in order to end their lives more quickly. In the case where a merciful execution was not ordered, the criminal would remain in the wheel until they died. This could sometimes take days, and the person would most likely die of shock or dehydration. At number 2, we have hanging, drawing, and quartering. This was common punishment in England for treason, which was considered the worst possible crime. This execution only applied to men, and remained so until 1814 when it was outlawed. The first stage of the execution was the victim being tied to a wooden frame and dragged behind a horse to the place of his inevitable death. The criminal would then be hung until they were nearly dead. Afterwards, they would be removed from the noose and laid on a table. The executioner would then disembowel and emasculate the victim and burn their entrails in front of their eyes, still being alive at this point. Finally, they would be beheaded. That brings us to number 1, and I know you must be asking yourself, after all of these disgusting, gruesome, horrific executions, what could possibly top them all? That, my friends, is something called scaphism. It is an ancient Persian method of execution. The victim would be placed in a hollowed out tree, the head, hands and feet protruding from this improvised container. The condemned was then forced to ingest milk and honey to the point of developing severe diarrhea. If that wasn't bad enough, more honey would then be rubbed onto the body so as to attract insects to the exposed appendages. The insects would then eat and breed within the victim's exposed flesh. Death, when it eventually occurred, was probably due to a combination of dehydration, starvation, and septic shock. That is the top 10 execution methods, most of which were ancient techniques. Sweet dreams. Sleep well. Oh, and remember to please subscribe, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Thanks a lot. Good night. Au revoir. Until next time. Bonjour.